Hi, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Roundtable Chat. I'm your host, Glain McCabe with the Executive Roundtable, and I'm excited today to be joined once again by my friend Paula Roberts of Halo Brand Leadership. Hi, Paula.
Hi, Glain. Nice to be back.
It's great to have you back. So one of my favorite authors of all time is a gentleman by the name of Seth Godin. And a few years ago, he wrote a book called Linchpin. And in it, he sort of put out this provocation that the only way to keep your job and be secure is to be a corporate linchpin, so to be completely indispensable. And of course, one of the ways that you make yourself indispensable is to make sure that everybody knows what it is that you do, and how you show up on a day-to-day basis and what separates you from everybody else. And this, of course, is in the vein of our topic today of branding and personal branding. And I know there's some of you out there that are going to be listening to this that go, oh God, here we go again. This branding stuff's coming up. But certainly everybody that I talk to, and as I sit in rooms where people are talking about talent and they're talking about, who are we going to move up and who can we move around, I will tell you that the things that get talked about are the things that we would describe as, those sort of what your brand is, like what you're known for. You're being described in sound bites oftentimes in these corporate meetings. So taking control of your brand and thinking about your brand is something that we're going to be exploring today. And I'm excited to be joined by Paula, who has had a very long career in the space of marketing and communication, and has worked on big corporate brands, and now is in the process of working on her own brand through her company, Halo Brand Leadership. So Paula, why don't you kick it off by just giving us a bit of a career highlight reel, as well as tell us a little bit about what Halo is all about.
For sure. Thanks very much, Glain. Well, let's see. Indeed, it has been a long career. I started way back in the late 80s at Xerox, which was one of the leading brands at that time, actually sort of almost the Google of its time. They've actually done a very good job of reinventing themselves. But from there, toured a host of different marketing communications agencies and had a chance to work on some of the truly great brands of the world, including Apple, including Adidas and Nissan, and a wide array, all of whom I learned a lot from. I made my transition to not-for-profit about 10 years ago, and dove in on perhaps one of the most beloved Canadian not-for-profit brands, Sick Kids, where I worked as their first ever vice president of marketing at Sick Kids Foundation. And then more recently went to Plan Canada, where a lesser known brand for a lot of reasons, but certainly we got them on the map by introducing a powerful sub-brand called Because I Am a Girl. So that sort of summarizes the last 10 years of my not-for-profit client experience. And then about 18 months ago, a little bit less than that, launched Halo Brand Leadership. And Halo really is all about branding with a particular eye on the not-for-profit sector, realizing that brand has to do a little bit of extra due diligence in that sector to drive fundraising. People don't give away their money very easily these days, and really want to know, what it's going toward, and want to be affiliated with brands in that sector that support their own ideology. So we're having a great time now working with lots of interesting clients, from the Canadian Breast Cancer Foundation to the Children's Aid Foundation, Hockey Canada, never a dull moment.
Wow, sounds really interesting. So we're on the topic of branding and specifically personal branding. And one of the things, before I get to, you and your brand and how you, sort of have built your brand over the years and where it is now, I want to get one thing out of the way, because oftentimes when I get into conversations about branding, invariably the thing comes up around reputation. Is your brand simply your reputation? Are these, how are these two things linked? How would you differentiate these two ideas? Brand versus reputation?
I think it's a great question. It's a really good place to start. It is something I think that a lot of people wrestle with, and there is, I think, an inextricable connection. They tend to move in the same direction, but there is a difference here. And I would say that, it's that classic definition of brand as a promise, right? So the sum total of how you or how an organization presents itself to the market, everything from how you carry yourself, what it is that you have to say, your own ideology, Are you on time for meetings? It can be sort of from the sublime to the ridiculous, really. And the user's experience in real time when they're interacting with you or with an organization. Really, at the end of the day, the user or who you're working with almost gets to decide who your brand is. It needs to be consistent, and if you're smart, it's something that you will actively build and nurture. You will make conscious decisions, you'll be accountable to what it is that you want to stand for, and then you'll make sure that you're delivering against that. I would say reputation is built on all those things that result sort of in a net credibility. So think of it as your brand over a longer window of time that results in people giving you the benefit of the doubt, even when things go wrong. So reputation is sort of extended brand. And, certainly have seen that with clients, say like a Sick Kids, a beloved brand. And often when they have bumped in very infrequently to trouble, that reputation that's resulted in the long term will stand them in good stead. I think the same rules apply for individuals.
I think that's a great point. I'd never really sort of thought about it in that way, and it makes me think of, I used to teach customer service years ago, and we used to talk about first impressions, and we used to talk about how when you have a very strong, positive first impression, the person can kind of mess up to 3 times before you will shift your impression of them. And,
Yep.
and the inverse is true. So if you had a very negative experience right off the bat, then it would take 3 wow experiences for the person to shift that impression. And I think that concept of, reputation is that building up over time, right? That does give you that little bit of a wiggle room, kind of like that strong first impression. If I screw up once, you still have this good, strong impression of me, so you're going to let it slide. But I would imagine that over time, if you don't maintain the reputation and it starts to disconnect from the brand promise, you're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't heard the math just like that before, but that does make sense, the 3 times rule. And I think that's where the idea comes in of actually being accountable to what you stand for. Don't let it just happen by accident, and nurture it, make decisions. That doesn't mean that you're inauthentic. It doesn't mean that you're not being yourself. It just means that you're consciously making these choices about how to best represent yourself, how to put your best foot forward.
Mm-hmm. So why don't you tell us, so let's make it real. So talk to us about what is your brand? How do you, how do you like to position yourself, and how would you say that's evolved over the years?
For sure. Well, I've already tipped my hand to say that I've been in this game for a long time. And certainly I think that I am the same as I've always been, but I perhaps have a clearer understanding based again on that word authenticity. So I would hope if people were to describe me with a single word, it would be authentic. What you see is what you get. There's not sort of a different face or, a different sense of who I am for different circumstances. Certainly for me, since I've made my shift to not-for-profit 10 years ago, I'm very social centered. So people and social issues really drive who I am. That's where I think I'm most interested in giving back. I think I have a high sense of accountability. That's a word I probably accidentally used or purposefully used a few times even on today's Hangout. And I'd like to think that people would say I'm fun as well. So, that whenever they're with me, even if it is all business, that maybe they can laugh or really reflect on some of the lighter things too. I think that makes it easier for people to spend time with you.
I love that. I'm going to go back to the word authenticity, because I find, in organizations, we're often given messages of how we need to be and what we need to do. And if you're in companies that have, competency models and all of these things that fly around about, what it means to be a leader here. I hear a lot of people say, I want to be my authentic self, but the question is, but can you really be your authentic self? I mean, how do you align being your authentic self with fitting a culture and getting the job done and all of those things, and still holding true to to that brand of who you are.
Sure. You know, I think too, what you are hearing, you asked me how that might have changed over time. And one of the luxuries of being an entrepreneur is that I get to make my own choices. And for people who are in perhaps more of a traditional corporate structure, you know, there are things that are imposed upon them. And I guess what I would just sort of say is this is a really good reason to do research before you join an organization. And you know, not necessarily just go with what's on the website. Find out who it is that you're reporting to. Find out, you know, what it is like to actually work there, and make sure that what you hold as sort of your traditional authenticity can exist and thrive in a place like that, because without it, I think you aren't going to be happy, and you're probably going to be less successful as well too. So again, back to personal accountability and doing that due diligence to make sure that your view of authenticity can live in the environment that you choose, and not being afraid to professionally say no, or that isn't something that I believe in, or articulating, you know, what your view is as well too. Of course, you have to be respectful, and you have to be prepared to take action. That if that doesn't mesh with, you know, the way you see yourself repeatedly over time in a big way, probably not at the right place.
Well, and it makes me think too, and we have this discussion a lot within the in the roundtable, is this notion of our values and how our values, you know, need to connect and align to the work that we're doing.
For sure. What are your non-negotiables? What are the things that you won't allow yourself to cross over on? And then be flexible with everything else. You know, I think that that is a really great way, because the world isn't made for us as individuals, you know, and sometimes those experiences will stretch us and help us to grow. But I think there are some hard lines that we all have, and it's good to know what that is from a value standpoint.
That's great. Okay, so we've talked about a few ways, you know, around building your personal brand. What other tips do you have? Like if somebody's sitting here thinking, you know what, I've never even thought about my brand. What would be your suggestions on how people could approach, you know, thinking about building out their brand?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, one of the things that I really encourage people to do is to spend some active time thinking about, you know, what their ideal professional or job or personal environment looks like. So actively commit the time and space to think about where it is that you thrive, where it is that you're most successful. You know, over the years, I've had the chance to work with some amazing brand leaders, and I've learned there are 3 questions that are sort of the hub of any good brand, be it personal or professional. How do you represent yourself in a way that's credible? So how do you present yourself in a way that's true and believable and that resonates? How is your brand different and distinct? And I'm not talking so much about creating faux difference or faux distinction. I mean, we are all unique as our own fingerprints. What are the differences that you have that you want to bring forward and want to highlight about your unique self? And then in particular for business, but I think also for people too, is this idea of how do you make that relevant to the people or the organizations that you're dealing with? And that means really being audience centric or centric to the individual that you're speaking with. How are you speaking in a way that has them nodding their head and going, yes, I know exactly what you mean. So in my experience, if you sharpen your own personal axe and know the answers to, you know, what makes you credible, what makes you different, what makes you relevant, be it as a person or as an organization, I think that'll help you have that clarity that will have a clearly delineated brand, and maybe make you ask some good questions about yourself too.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So those are 3 really great clear buckets and good places for people to, I think, dive in and reflect on for sure. So let's flip it around and say, you know, so what are the mistakes that either you've made through your own career building your brand, or that you see people make when it comes to both building their brand and then maintaining that brand image?
Absolutely. You know, I think that I've sort of touched on this already, and it's this idea of, you know, knowing what it is that you stand for, and maybe even having that clearly delineated in writing somewhere so that you can go back and actually check and see. Evolution of who you are as a person and as a brand over time is natural and healthy, but I do think you want to be mindful that it's happening. So it's not a bad journaling exercise actually to check in with yourself on a semi-regular basis to say, okay, this is where I was at this point in time. How is that evolving? And then I think obviously to be open and receptive to feedback from your audiences. You know, how are you being seen as an individual or as a professional? And ask people who you trust about perhaps vulnerabilities that you think you might have, or things that necessarily compromise that credibility, differentiation, and relevance, and be prepared to act on it. I think, you know, I know from my time with Executive Roundtable, you talk about the importance of having a personal board of directors. And this is a great thing to have your own personal board of directors, those trusted advisors weigh in on to say, how do you think I'm different now than where I was? And do you think that that's positive or negative? And really own it and reflect on it.
I think that's really important. And, you know, as I was listening to you, I was thinking, you know, one of the things I think in our brands, often where we focus on our brands, is all of our strengths, right? We always, you know, we think about, you know, this is my differentiator, this is what I bring to the table. And what I found, and I'm completely convinced of this now, and the more I work with increasingly senior people, right? And the more senior you go in your career, and the more experience you have in your career, those strengths always have a distinct liability, inextricably, I'm not saying that word right, interconnected with it, right? So they are impossible to pull apart. If you have a strength in something, there is something that is not so good going along beside that strength. And it's those kinds of things that are also part of your brand, though, and managing that downside. So I think that idea of being relentless with getting feedback, but also recognize that some of those things that probably you're being told to, you know, fix or close the gap on, could in fact be tied to things that are where you get energy and juice and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yep, and it may just be a matter of where you let those other pieces come to the fore. You know, there's a matter of appropriateness too. I talked about before, hopefully, that my personal brand is seen to have a little bit of an element of fun. Well, sometimes that fun comes out as being self-deprecating. And if you are aware that you have a blind spot, you know, no better way to manage that blind spot than give people fair warning by, you know, giving yourself a little bit of a personal jibe. I think it makes everybody feel more comfortable in terms of who they are. Of course, it doesn't excuse bad behavior, but I do think that being mindful about, as you say, sort of the two sides of all of your assets, also having a liability, it allows you to more assertively and confidently manage to the situation and the people you're working with.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so how do you keep your brand fresh and relevant? I mean, you talked about journaling, like checking in every once in a while. What other things is, you know, around this topic of fresh? Because I think sometimes people think, you know, well, this is what I'm known for, and this is going to, you know, this works for me, so why mess with it?
For sure. One of the things that I'm really enjoying about having a diverse base of clients is that I'm interacting with such a wide range of people and issues. And it is something that does make you, I think, look in different ways at who it is that you are. Realizing that everybody doesn't have that opportunity, I think that the answer is a lot of the same critical things that, you know, maybe have been said before. It's watching a Google Hangout like this and learning from other people. It's reading periodicals that maybe aren't in your sweet spot, you know, maybe are pushing you somewhere different. I had the opportunity to be on a International Women's Day speaking panel at Coca-Cola last week. And the other women on the panel were from Walmart, were a minister of provincial parliament, and from the Toronto International Film Festival. These are not necessarily people that I would bump into, but putting myself in that situation where you are talking to different people, again, a lot like what the Executive Roundtable offers, I think really does create that freshness, because it holds up a mirror to see yourself in a different way. The questions people ask you, the things where you may be really clear and inspiring, the things where people may see you having a miss. And I think that's something that everybody can do by sort of putting themselves in a place where they are going to meet people, or they're going to read about things that are perhaps not traditionally in their wheelhouse. So that's a great way to do it from an extroverted standpoint. The journaling's a great way to do it from an introversion standpoint. And again, that board of directors really holding you to your authentic self, I think all together can help you have a good feel on the pulse of your personal brand.
And I loved what you said at the start about, you know, that your brand evolves. You know, I think of my brand in my 20s versus my brand in my 30s to my brand where I am today in my 40s. There's definitely been threads. I think you are who you are, you know, as individuals, and you carry those strengths forward. But definitely, if I think of how I played those strengths out in my 20s versus how I, you know, use those and how they show up for me today, there's definitely been a refinement, an evolution, a finessing around some of those behaviors. And some, I have to say, you know, there was a brand that I held out for myself when I was, you know, always the youngest person on the executive team, that I can't hold out anymore. You know, once you get after 35, you can't keep holding that card. So sometimes your brand can get stale if you're not careful. You got to be careful to keep reinventing it. So
absolutely. Well said.
Well, Paula, thanks so much for joining us again today. And if you're interested in learning more about Paula and her thoughts, be sure to check out our website for the Realizing Leadership article that we did profiling Paula and the work she does at Halo Brand Leadership, as well as some of her thoughts on not only branding and communication, but also on making transitions in your career. Lots of great stuff in that. So visit our website for that. Stay tuned for more Roundtable Chats coming up next month as we delve into more of the topics that are of interest to you. Thanks so much for tuning in. And Paula, once again, thanks for being with me today.
Thank you so much, Glain.